Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. You're watching The Naturalist Capitalist, and I'm Reed Coverdale. I've got another special guest on the show. I've got Michael Madrid, who's running for U.S. Congress from New York's District 10. How you doing, Michael?
Very, very well. Thank you, Reed, and thank you for having me on tonight.
All right, awesome. So you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, what you do for work, why you're running for Congress right now, and what has prepared you for this position?
Sure. My name is, well, I guess you told me, Michael Madrid. I am a software developer by profession for most of my career, although I've done a number of other things. I've taught English in Japan. I worked in finance a bit. Um, but besides software, one of the big things I've done is economics. I was in a PhD program for a while at UCSD. I studied it in undergrad also, and that has been a lifelong passion of mine. Um, so I guess from that passion, I've every now and then thought about running for office. The thing which really pushed me over the edge was getting involved in some of what are called YIMBY causes. You may be familiar with the term for those who are not. It's Yes in My Backyard. And a couple of the main things is building more housing because we don't build enough housing for people, and also better transit so people can get from their housing to their work. So, against the backdrop of studying economics, being a very, appreciating the power of the market in creating wealth for society, in getting rid of poverty, um, getting involved in, I guess you might say to a certain extent, radicalized by the issues of lack of housing, which we're experiencing in New York. I decided to make my run and put the software career on hold for a little while.
All right, awesome. Um, what I like about you is when I pull up your website, if I didn't see the word libertarian there, I wouldn't necessarily know that's what you are, and that's
Yep.
cool. So you've got views that I think you've squared with the libertarian philosophy, but it's not the typical issues that you'd see on a libertarian website. It's not end the Fed, protect the Second Amendment. Just that you have things that are about housing and about basic income and about the environment. So I figure we can just kind of dive into each bullet point you've got on your
Sure.
website. So
Mhm.
the first one you have is legalizing legalize housing. Do you want to explain to us what that means?
Sure.
We
Maybe would it be helpful if before if I talked a little bit about the overarching strategy, and maybe that squares a little more with the libertarian, but also maybe interesting as we talk through the bullet points.
Yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So the overarching message of my campaign is simplify. And this is a very libertarian message, but I think a message which will resonate with, progressive Democrats as well, that we need to simplify certain things of government. Certainly, we're seeing that with all the protests, with decriminalization. I don't think any progressive is going to argue that we need to take control of law enforcement and simplify what it does and reform it. So that's something which I think progressives, libertarians will agree. Things like occupational licensing, things of like getting the government out of providing, cronyism, providing perks to special interests, to farm interests, to cutting the military. I think these are all issues which will appeal to a broad swathe of people who realize they might think maybe we want a little more on healthcare and education, but a lot of other things where we could have a lot smaller and more efficient government. And a lot of the policies, I think most of the policies fit in very much are in tune with that message of simplify. So you mentioned housing, and I'll go to that first. The message here is legalize housing. We have housing shortages, particularly in superstar cities like New York City and San Francisco. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have very heavy-handed local governments which say you cannot build housing here. We have these zoning codes which say, for instance, in Soho, you cannot have, in New York City, you cannot have retail and you can't live in Soho. Now, anyone who's been to Soho, New York City, realizes that both of these functions actually do happen, but the laws say you can't. The laws restrict how much you can do. And they do things like, if you want to live in Soho, you have to prove that you're an artist, and the Department of Buildings actually has to verify your art portfolio, which is a huge waste of time for everyone involved. Zoning laws are even worse in the fact that individual city council members approve projects, and it's very hard to get projects approved. And this is endemic to the whole country. It means that a lot of the housing which should be built to to alleviate the needs of the community is just not getting built. And this might seem to some like a local issue, but this has become a national issue, so much so that I think every major Democratic candidate, presidential candidate, was adopting the housing problem to help, get rid of the problems of zoning.
Right. So the argument for zoning is that if you don't have these laws, that things will get out of control. So is there a balance that we need to maintain? Do we just need to draw it way back, or do you think we need to eliminate it completely?
Sure. You can. I mean, you probably don't want to have a nuclear power plant right in Midtown Manhattan. So, but would anyone ever think of doing that in the first place? So you could probably think of some edge cases where zoning is useful, and some of the arguments like we need green space. I totally agree. We need certain amounts of green space, but we probably, we have so many laws, zoning and other things like setbacks, height limits. If you're building taller buildings, maybe you have more space to have parks. So you can have more housing and more parks. Parking regulations is just, for a New Yorker like me, is just crazy. We do not need nearly as much parking as we have. And this kind of gets into the second issue on my platform, which is free our streets. But having a lot more, non-car space. But that's, it's part of this whole idea that we can change our zoning laws, our laws on parking, and if we liberalize that a little, the community can build what it needs to build.
I agree, and I like to hear that you care about green spaces, and that's another big section on your website here. I'm glad to see the Libertarian Party start to care about the environment finally. Do you want to tell us what you think the government's role is in getting to a green energy economy, protecting the environment? A lot of libertarians are cool on the side of getting regulations that stop progress out of the way. But do you think that the government also has a role to stop people from doing certain types of pollution through a tax or through certain regulations of some sort?
Absolutely. I mean, there are two parts to my environmental policy, one which libertarians, I think most libertarians and probably most progressives will both love, and that is just getting rid of subsidies to polluters. There's no reason we should be subsidizing natural gas, coal. I mean, coal is the big one. Natural gas, at least, has traditionally helped lessen pollution by displacing coal, but there's no reason why natural gas, or really any form of energy, should be getting a subsidy. So getting rid of those subsidies. Farm subsidies. Agriculture is a huge polluter. Obviously we need to feed people, but we don't need to shovel subsidies to farmers to overproduce food and overpollute. So that's another thing I think government should just totally get out of. The military is a huge, huge polluter. We do not need to spend nearly as much on the military as we do. So let's just get rid of it. The other part of my policy, which appeals to absolutely no one, because libertarians think it's a tax, so they think I'm a socialist, and to progressives, they have totally given up on the market. So any market-based solution is anathema to them, and that is pollution pricing or pollution taxes. And the idea here is we want to discourage pollution by making it more expensive. And the wonderful thing about this is instead of saying, oh, we're going to give everyone an electric car, oh, we're going to, do nuclear power, or we're going to do carbon capture, many of which they might work, a lot of them probably won't work, and all of which are going to be wildly expensive. With pollution pricing, you just say, we're going to make pollution expensive, and okay, market, come here, use all your ingenuity, all your innovation, make pollution cheap, or just get rid of the pollution which is expensive so that we have energy which is cheap and which is clean. And what is the cleanest form of energy which is going to solve our crisis? Well, it might be solar, it might be wind, might be nuclear, geothermal, it might be technology X. And how much subsidy is technology X going to get? Zero, because it hasn't been invented yet. And this is always the problem which a non-incumbent technology is going to have. It is never going to have these subsidies funneled to it because there's no one working, or very few people working on technology X. There are very few companies with a vested interest in technology X. Whereas, there's a very big vested interest in coal. So coal is going to get its money, gas is going to get its money, solar is going to get its money. The nice thing about a pollution tax is the government is not picking a winner. Any technology which can solve pollution has a huge bonanza, so is going to get investment just naturally. It's going to be a gold mine for any technology who can do this. So it just lets the market work, and no one is picking a winner. There are no special interests. It's just whatever works, solves a problem, and does it efficiently.
I think that's a great plan. That sounds kind of exactly what Bill Weld was saying. I was at one of his rallies once, and that's pretty much exactly what he said. All these Democrats have a multi-billion or multi-trillion-dollar plan where really what you have to do is make the things that are hurting the earth expensive, and they will go away, and the free market will provide solutions. I think that's really true.
Yep, absolutely.
I did line work for a long time, and I'm a truck driver now. And something that I've noticed is a lot of people focus on transportation without thinking about the grid much. So, they're all about these battery-powered trucks and cars, even if we're still running off of coal plants. So do you think it's really important that we stress that we need to overhaul our energy system before we really even worry about transportation? Because running trucks off of coal is way worse than running them off of diesel, right?
Yes, absolutely. But I think, if you apply pollution pricing, it's the same thing that we just discussed. The expensive energies are going to be displaced. The expensive polluting technologies are going to be displaced by the cleaner technologies, because cleaner is going to have a cost advantage. So you don't really have to do all that much. I'll just give one small shout out to the Jones Act, because I just cannot talk to anyone without mentioning it. But we have this law called the Jones Act, which I'll just reiterate for the people who don't know. But that requires that all goods which are shipped between two U.S. ports are shipped on ships which are owned by U.S. companies, crewed by U.S. crews, and have to actually be built in the U.S., have been built in the U.S. And this makes shipping wildly expensive. And certain things just can't be shipped. Like, we do not have a Jones Act LNG carrier, liquid natural gas carrier, for instance. So what we do, instead of just shipping cheap gas from from like Maryland up to New England, we have a Russian LNG carrier come to New England, sell New England gas for $9 a barrel. For a BOE or whatever, some equivalent, whatever it is, $9. Then it goes down empty to Maryland, where it buys gas for $3, and then takes that gas and brings it to Pakistan. So we have all sorts of crazy things like this. All these regulations, if we got rid of them and implemented pollution pricing, you don't have to worry about, do we need to do transportation first or power first? You can do it all at the same time, and it would all just work.
I agree. And for everyone who's watching, go look up the Jones Act. It just turned 100 years old last month, I think. And not only is it bad for the environment, it has killed the United States shipping industry. I'm going to butch the numbers here, but I think there's like 100. I think it's about 100 large ships that the United States owns, and then it's out of like 30,000 in the world, and it's because of the Jones.
There are, I believe, 169 U.S. flagged vessels, and these are ocean going, because there are a lot of Jones Act tugboats on, the Mississippi and everything, but you're talking ocean going. And the reason I know this is I did a Jones Act video, and I will send you a link, and if you'd like to tweet that out or something, the 10 most crazy facts about the Jones Act, which I could find.
I'll put the link in the description of the video so people can go watch it.
Wonderful.
I think you're totally right on your climate solution. I have to laugh at what you said about how no one's going to like it, and I know what you're saying, because
it's a thankless people. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Thankless position.
But it is the most obvious way forward, and hopefully people can really see that.
A lot of smart people, including Milton Friedman, advocated for the solution. So it's something which should get consideration, and it just gets zero respect.
Absolutely. The next point on your website I want to talk about that might surprise some libertarians, but it is becoming more and more popular, is you have a column about basic income. So do you want to just outline what your policy and thought is there? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, the classic libertarian position is all social welfare happens from private institutions, charities or whatever. And maybe that might be able to work. I think it hasn't been proved, and to get from where we are now to that position, you probably are going to need, at the very least, you're going to need an intermediate step. Currently, we have over 100 means-tested welfare programs, whether federal or state. I would like to clean all that, simplify all of that into a basic income. So from a libertarian standpoint, this is a much more efficient safety net than we currently have, and makes government a lot smaller. It means we have a lot less bureaucrats whose salaries we have to pay and whose retirements we have to pay, and all this redundant means testing, all this redundant effort, this big government just goes away. It's not only that, but it's a lot of other things. If we talk about, for instance, minimum wage and price controls, other things which may mean that businesses which might be viable are no longer viable because they have to pay a high minimum wage. With a basic income, you could maybe get rid of minimum wage. At the very least, you could set the minimum wage lower because you have this safety net with basic income. And that would mean that businesses which were not viable when minimum wage is up here, now that minimum wage is over here, it is more viable. So this means that you're going to have more businesses, you're going to have more jobs in terms of wages. If you have, more businesses hiring people, it's likely that wages will go up a little, and you're not going to be quite at the minimum. So I think, basic income is really, it was my last position. It was one which I was kind of lukewarm on, but the more I think about it, this is kind of the crucial piece in this whole very disruptive free market capitalism that we preach, which I think allows us to have this safety net and allows us to preach, hey, let's get rid of all the, let's get rid of the subsidies, let's get rid of the protections. The farmers are not going to starve when we get rid of farm subsidies because at the very least they have a basic income. People who, if the minimum wage isn't quite $15, they're not going to starve because at the very least they have this basic income. So I think, it's a great selling point, but I think it's also great policy because we do live in a very disruptive world. There are many, many people who, 3 months ago, they were working very hard, and now they are not working at all. It's not because they're lazy and they decided, I can just survive on these benefits. It's because we had this huge disruption called COVID. And if we had a basic income before COVID, would we need this? What was it? How much was PPP? 3 trillion or something? And they're thinking of doing more. Would we have needed to do something like PPP? Maybe, but maybe we could have thought about it a lot more, made it a lot more stringent. And so from that standpoint too, I think if you have basic income, there is a lot less danger that you have these, crazy programs like PPP, which are just so open to abuse. So I think it's a very lightweight, efficient way to do safety net. And there are a lot of smart people on this one too. I mentioned Milton Friedman before. Milton Friedman was a very big advocate of basic income, not quite the UBI, but more a negative income tax, which is more what I support. But in general, we should think about what we can afford, what how to do this. I'm open to various ideas, but we should have some efficient safety net there so that we can do our very disruptive capitalism.
Mm-hmm. So the counter to that from a lot of libertarians is going to be, where is this money coming from? The government doesn't have any money, so we're going to have to raise taxes for this. How the idea of a balanced budget, which we've never come anywhere close to, would this be handled at federal level, or is this something you'd like to see handled by states or municipalities? If it's at a federal level, how are we going to achieve a balanced budget? And also, how would we get a clean bill passed? Because we saw how this $1,200 payment to Americans was just massively botched. So how are we going to be able to ensure that we get a bill that's passed that is clean and is not full of fraud?
Yeah, well, that is always the danger on things like this. You're never going to get a perfect bill, I don't think. You're never going to get perfect anything in human existence. Certainly, even, and you're going to have people who, I said, I don't think that a lot of people will be lazy and just take the benefits and use it to, be drunk all day. But you will get a certain amount. The thing is, we already have this. So it's not a question of, is this going to be the perfect solution? Is it going to be better than we have right now? I mean, we already are paying out all this money. We already have huge amounts of fraud. Any complication means any special interest which wants to insert itself where, no one can tell what's going on, they have so much more scope to do this. So absolutely, these are concerns with this bill, but having, something cleaner, having one regime rather than hundreds of different programs means we can hopefully these problems which you raised are more manageable. As to whether this is federal or state, I'm open to either. I think these are things we have to think about. I was before before our session here, I was looking at when you were talking about working on the Tulsi Gabbard campaign, and one of the things I think you said about Tulsi was that on a lot of her positions, she she was willing to say this is something we have to think about. And I think that's very important that politicians do, because too often politicians and their voters, unfortunately, parrot this, but they say something like Medicare for all and Green New Deal, and then you don't even know what they're talking about, but it all becomes the slogan. So you are raising some very good issues, and these are definitely things which need to be thought about. But I think the general concept of this, lightweight, efficient safety net is something which can work.
Okay, yeah, fair. What I kind of want to segue into next is something that I think all libertarians would agree on, and it's that if we want any change at all, we need a more transparent and representative form of government. Every other candidate
absolutely.
I've had on so far is in very large support of things like ranked choice voting, same-day voting registration, things that make the government more reflective of what the people want. I don't know if you are aware of, you were just bringing up Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if you're aware of her Securing America's Elections Act. There's like 14 states, I think, in the country that do all their voting electronically, and there's no way to retrace the votes, and that every vote was cast a certain way. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that idea, and then the ideas of like voice voting and just voting reform in general. What your view on those things?
Yeah. Well, I think the future is definitely electronic voting, but as you say, there needs to be accountability. I mean, we can all go into our Amazon account and see exactly what we ordered, and exactly where our package is, and I don't think there's any reason we can't do that in the future. I've brought this up to some people who I think are very smart, who know more about the issue than me on this, and they say we're just not ready. So, maybe, but I think that's definitely a direction. As we see, certainly in New York, mail-in voting has lots of problems. And the whole Board of Elections here in New York, the recent primaries, there have been huge amounts of problems. So there's, like with basic income, like with any policy, there is no perfect standard we can measure against. It's all what imperfections are we willing to contemplate. So this is an issue I haven't thought as much about. It's not something like the Jones Act where I can rattle off 100 different facts at you. But I think in general, yes, the idea of openness, of immediacy, of being able to register and be verified, that we don't have a huge process, which is going to mean that people who have a life are not able to register, or who have kids, or who don't have the luxuries of people who are wealthier, that they can't vote, that voting is a burden. I think we definitely have to look at those and do everything we can to mitigate that. But I haven't really looked as much as what the solution should be.
Okay. So New York, I think 70% of the population usually doesn't vote. Is that correct?
I'm not sure, but a large amount doesn't vote, yes. I think that's probably, I think more than 30% vote, but a large portion doesn't, yes.
All right, so a prominent libertarian figure who made a lot of waves in New York was Sharp.
Yes.
And the thing I really liked about him was a lot what I like about you is that he didn't really fit squarely into any box. He kind of has his ideas that, are maybe unconventional, but I like how he still squares them with his philosophy, and he's obviously thought about them just like you have. I think you have a lot of potential to reach voters who have been disenfranchised, and the great thing about being a libertarian, especially a libertarian like yourself, is that you can reach people on both sides of the aisle. There are a lot of people who would never vote for a Democrat or who would never vote for a Republican, but they would vote for you. So what is your What specific issues really matter to your constituents a lot that you think you can really reach out to them and show them that you have a balanced approach and that you're really the only choice? So issues that matter really to New York more than the rest of the country, I guess.
Yeah. Well, this is probably something I have to do a little more on, but a lot of, I mean, this is the bluest of Democratic blue districts. So a lot of the issues, I agree with people, but it's not what I'm campaigning on, because I think the other issues I'm campaigning on are things which get neglected. So if you talk about abortion, yes, I am, as a libertarian, I believe in a woman's choice, 100%. There's some other issues like maybe decrim, which I think most Democrats are sympathetic to, but maybe not quite the front burner that something like abortion is. So, I think part of what I'm doing, it's not just campaigning on the same issues that my opponent will, but bringing some of the other issues. Housing, which we discussed, is a newer issue. There are a lot of people in New York City who are very concerned about this, but it is among my constituency, maybe a little less. So I view it as my challenge is to educate them on the issue and try to get this in their consciousness, rather than just say, oh, yes, I want to connect with you on this. And transport also, having a much less car-dependent transport infrastructure, much more bicycle, pedestrian. Paris, a lot of European cities are doing wonderful things by making their cities just paradises for pedestrians and for cyclists and for scooters, things like that, micro-mobility. This is another issue where I am kind of on the cusp, but where I view it more, my job is to move the electorate rather than just to echo the electorate. And this is, I already have a lot stacked against me. This is probably not something which is going to get completely through, but we are going to do as much as we can to get the message out, so that in future elections, whether it's me or even the incumbent candidates, they are taking these positions, and the net result is whoever wins, we get better cities. So
are you just running against the incumbent, or is there a Republican?
There is nominee? A Republican. There is a Republican.
Okay. Tell us about your opponents. What you're gonna give us your critique of them. What you're gonna do differently than them. Where your strengths outweigh their weaknesses, I guess.
Okay, great. I will talk about the Democratic candidate, the incumbent, because the Republican I don't believe is really running a serious race. I believe they've raised less money than I have. So, so I'll talk about Jerry Nadler. I'm sure you've seen him in the impeachment hearings. He got the progressive blessing from AOC, but I would describe him more as a conservative incumbent Democrat, very traditional. He is liberal on certain issues, decrim. He is for legalization of sex work, for instance. He doesn't talk too much about it. There's one question on his website, and his answer on that is, do you favor legalizing prostitution? His answer is yes. And that's it. No. He is not quite as progressive as one might think. A lot of sex workers have complained about the FOSTA SESTA Act, which was recently passed, and Jerry supported that. He has now funded a study he recognizes that maybe that wasn't the best act, so he is sponsoring legislation or supporting legislation to study whether that was a good decision. I think it might have been better if he had done the study first, if they had done the study first and then thought about whether this was good legislation. But I think the upshot of this is going to be that nothing is going to get done. And with decrim and police reform as well, he and the Democratic leadership in the House have just announced this huge bill for policing reform, which includes some things on qualified immunity, but it is never going to pass because there's too much that Republicans object to. Now, you could say, well, qualified immunity in itself won't pass, but there are 3 or 4 things which Republicans would agree to. So why not just do a separate bill, pass that, get that out of the way, and then hammer home on things like qualified immunity? So this is a case also where it's not necessarily the position, but the approach. And I think Jerry is very good at, crafting these bills which, push the right buttons, make the right sounds. But if you look at what happens in the end, the result is they just get stuck in committee or stuck, without passage in the Senate, and nothing gets done. And he can say, well, I tried, but he doesn't have to have any fallout from upsetting the special interests who would have been affected by these laws. Another thing he wants to do, which has been his pet project for about 20 years, is build this tunnel called the Cross Harbor Tunnel, which would go from underneath, I think, Brooklyn. It would go underneath Brooklyn and go to New Jersey, and it would get a lot of the truck traffic, which goes on, I guess, Route 95 and other places off of those highways. And in theory, because it'd be rail, in theory it would be green. In theory, it would be getting rid of this congestion. Well, I can think of a much better piece of legislation, which we may have mentioned a couple times before, which would solve this exact problem. Just repeal the goddamn Jones Act. This would get rid of the trucks. You would not need a $11 billion rail tunnel, which we can't afford in the first place. But this is another example of just the kind of performative legislation you're going to get from Jerry. He's going to say, yes, we want to build this. The unions love it because it could be a potential bonanza for them. The rail unions and the rail companies which support them, they love it because, that's also for them a potential bonanza. And even though, they probably know it's unlikely to pass, Jerry does keep funding these studies. So these are, multi-million, I think they might be even multi-$100 million studies, which are never going to do any good to anyone except the people who are getting this revenue. So this is not going to help constituents. It's not going to help the environment at all. It's just going to help a bunch of special interests. And I think if we were to sum up what Jerry does these days, this is pretty much it. He funds studies. He, launches these bills which are not going to get passed, and they don't really solve problems. But the cycle of money from him to the special interests back to him just continues. So.
Yeah. Well, I think he might want to keep any progressives who are thinking about voting from him from hearing about you and listening to this video, because you make a lot of sense and you're offering actual solutions, and you seem like a type of guy who's not just going to throw your hat in for some bill that is not going to pass. You seem like a guy who is driving for real solutions and who's going to put his foot down when we don't need something that they're trying to push through. Is there any other issues you want to specifically address? Is there anything that's like up near the top that's not mentioned on your website?
I think I've discussed pretty much all of them. I have ideas on healthcare and education, and they do involve shaking things up. I will have more on the website in the future, but those, if we started talking about those, we'd probably be here a while. So definitely would be up for a follow-up in the future, and we'll put more information. But I think we've discussed the 5 which I have on the website, and the Jones Act, I think, is my bonus issue, which I always bring up. So.
All right, so we will do a follow-up video. I'll take you up on that. But right now, what can we do to help you? Can we give you donations? Are you looking for more interviews? Are you looking for social media sharing? What is the biggest thing we can do, and how do we do it for you?
All of the above. I mean, we have had some donations, and we're in fairly decent shape. But politics, you can always use more. We're doing a lot more now that COVID is kind of calmed down in New York. We are being safe, but we are getting out on the streets and trying to get the message out. And the more people we can put out, the better. We are starting to do Facebook ads too. We might do some Twitter ads, but so contributions are always welcome. Any sharing you can do on social media, very, very helpful. So yeah, all of the above.
All right. Well, awesome. I will put a link to your Jones Act video and your website.
Wonderful.
And your Twitter page. Are there any other links? Are you on Facebook, Instagram?
Yes, I will send you all of that, and anything you can do to spread the word, very much appreciated.
All right, so everyone who's watching this video, please share it and go to his website, go to his social media pages, share it with your friends, get the word out there so people know who this guy is. And Michael, I want to thank you for coming on and taking the time. And as I said, we'll do it again. We'll follow up as your race continues. And I wish you the best of luck.
Okay, well, thanks again for having me on. And it's always great to talk with other thoughtful people. So.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode.